I was crossing a city that wears winter like a habit when I saw him move through the lamplight with the quiet of someone who has practiced being unseen. The night had given the pavements an honest sheen. Windows kept their promises in warm squares. The river rehearsed its own cold speech beneath the bridges. Somewhere a bakery hid its late labor under modest smells. And here came a young man who had learned to make his bones and his hunger walk in step. He was not dressed for the weather. Pride will outvote good sense when pride is all a person owns outright. His hat had known better days. His coat remembered a stronger tailor. He kept his hands in his pockets as if they could stay warm by clutching nothing. His mouth was set for jokes that would be cruel if anyone gave him the chance to make them. No one did. He hurried past chances the way a starving man hurries past mirrors. My work that night had been proceeding with the rhythm I prefer, lists checked against faces I actually know, chimneys that cooperate, doors that understand discretion, small proofs tucked where morning will find them without spectacle. But the sky has a way of pointing you at what needs you, even when you are pretending to be busy elsewhere. I eased the runners toward a lane that had tried to be fashionable and settled for being practical. The reindeer flicked their ears. They know the sound of trouble that can be mended. He paused outside a restaurant with a door that swung open and shut like a metronome for laughter. He watched a group come out, the kind of people who believe the street bends to avoid them. A coin flashed, a glove tugged, a scarf adjusted, a joke made in a voice that expected forgiveness without merit. He looked as if he might invent one clever cruelty and spend it on them to buy himself a moment's heat. He did not. He moved on, faster, as if the spectacle had been an insult that doubled his hunger. He turned into a quieter street and stopped under a sign that promised millinery upstairs and cents on the ground floor. He stood as if the brick itself were telling him to leave. Then he squared his shoulders, which were not yet large enough to carry what he intended, and walked toward a narrow stair. I have learned not to interfere with every bad decision. People use mistakes as ladders when they are determined to climb out of something. But there are nights when a single wrong rung breaks years of work. I set the sleigh down on the silent side of the roof and listened. At the top of the stair, a door had learned the polite half-creak of a place that values quiet visitors. The young man's fingers felt along the frame with the competence of someone who has opened things he should not. He breathed through his teeth to keep them from chattering. The lock resisted out of habit, not virtue. He slipped in and closed the door behind him with the care of a burglar who would prefer not to belong to that word. Inside, the room had done its best with what it had. A small fire that knew it was part of the furniture now. Neat chairs swept by hands that respect chairs. A table set to receive work as ceremony rather than drudgery. On the wall hung a hat with a modest ribbon and a coat that had learned to be mended without complaining. On the mantel, a clock kept time for someone who still believed appointments could be met. A wreath of dried orange slices gave the air a fragrance that insisted on cheerfulness without being naive about cost. I liked this room. It had the courage to be decent on a small income. He stood just inside and let the heat find him. It touched his face and made him look younger and more foolish, which is to say, it made him look like someone who had not always been clever at the wrong things. He went to the mantel and saw the little purse lying there, the one with string enough to tie around a wrist. He looked at it the way a man looks at a raft. He did not pick it up. He picked up the picture beside it instead. A stiff photograph of a woman whose eyes had learned to land gently. He rubbed his thumb across the glass as if it might answer back. Then he set it down and laughed without humor. "Happy Christmas," he told the room as if it were responsible. He took the purse. In the hall, a latch clicked. A step that knew its own house hesitated politely before committing to the room. He had time to hide and chose not to. He put the purse in his coat. He turned to face the door, like a man who finally admits what he's showing up for. She entered with a parcel against her hip and a hatpin between her fingers. She was not young. She was not old the way calendars count. She had the face of a woman who has negotiated with a city for the right to be gentle in it. She set down the parcel, took off her gloves one honest finger at a time, and then looked up into the face of a stranger. Except it wasn't. Her mouth formed a name before she let it out. She stopped it at the last second and replaced it with a sentence that had taken her years to practice. "Good evening," she said, as if he were an expected guest. "You look cold." He tried a smile that could have been a weapon and found it had dulled. "I've been worse." She nodded. "There's tea," she said, "and bread. We'll quarrel later about why you're here." You would be surprised how many calamities can be postponed by the phrase, "we'll quarrel later." She hung her coat, moved to the kettle, made a small, ordinary fuss of cups and knives and butter that had to be negotiated with because December had its hand on the pantry. She did not hurry. Hurry makes fear feel invited. He stood where he was, the purse in his pocket, a weight that threatened to pull him through the floorboards. She put a cup in his hand as if he were someone she had always intended to hand a cup to at last. He swallowed confusion before he tasted tea. He ate as if bread were a complicated question that he could answer only by chewing. She watched him eat with the restraint of a person who remembers manners in their bones, even when feeling threatens to make a spectacle of itself. "Do you know me?" he said. She looked fully into his face. The lamplight did not flatter him. It was fair. "I know your father's mouth," she said. "I know your grandfather's left ear, the way it thinks it hears better than the right one. I know the way you hold disappointment like a tooth you can't leave alone." He made a noise between a laugh and a wound. "So I failed every way you warned me I would." "You're here," she said. "We can work with here." He put the cup down with the carefulness of a man trying not to break something he would like to keep. "I came to steal from you," he said, as if confession might earn him the right to leave. "I suspected," she said. "You took the wrong thing. The money is in the drawer where I always keep it. The purse is for memory." He stared, then fumbled at his pocket as if it had become disobedient. He set the purse on the table and pushed it toward her like a general surrendering badly. She did not touch it. She reached instead for his hand, which had forgotten how to be held without flinching. He did not make speeches. She did not insist on tears. She did not inquire after particulars she did not need. She had read the ledger of his face and found the figures clear enough to begin. "I know his story in outline as I know the outline of this city. A boy clever enough to be injured by his own cleverness. A young man who mistook distance for destiny. An apprentice to pride who believed rescues are for the weak until he needed one, and then decided he was too proud to be weak enough to accept it. He had built hurts into arguments, and arguments into alibis, and discovered that alibis keep you out of rooms where you are meant to be forgiven. "Take off your coat," she said. "It has nothing to recommend it." He obeyed out of muscle memory from years when she had been able to command by asking. She set it by the fire with a face that promised to tire the coat into better obedience later. He sat because she looked at the chair and then at him, and he remembered the old rule about chairs and mothers. He tried again to be cruel enough to leave. He failed. "There are failures I rank with miracles." "You will go to the police," he said finally, needing a villain to inherit if he could not be one convincingly. "I will go to the baker," she said mildly, "in the morning to see if he'll let you help before the son learns to behave. You can take the dough from the mixer to the bench and try not to break your own wrists. You can be paid in bread and coin until he trusts you with change. If you prefer policemen, you may inform them of your presence. They like a simple night." He looked at the door as if it were an instrument. "Why would you?" "Because I am tired," she said simply, "of carrying a ghost when I might carry a son. Because Christmas is for poor bargains redeemed. Because I have butter for two and will not eat for one when two is possible. Because you did not run." He dropped his face into his hands and made the sound a grown person makes when he is learning to cry again without the excuses age invents. She did not pat. She stood and poured more tea and waited. Because patience is the cleanest cloth in any house, I kept to the window because they had earned their privacy. Snow spoke politely against the glass. The reindeer fidgeted and then stood as if someone had explained the stakes to them. In such rooms, my job is simple. I make time elastic. I keep neighbors from deciding to call on trivial errands. I persuade the clock to let them say what they have to say without robbing tomorrow of its hours. He told enough. Not the names, because names can be tidied later. Not the boasts, because boasting is for men who still have energy to waste. He told her where he had slept when he wouldn't admit he needed beds. He told her which plans had worn out their welcome. He confessed to injuries he had caused, as if naming them could rewind them into decency. She accepted just enough knowledge to begin mending, and declined the kind that would have made her poor with his particular sins. Love has boundaries because it intends to last. They ate the heel of the loaf as if it were a feast. She found him a shirt of his father's that still kept the shape of shoulders past and might persuade new ones to grow properly. She gave him the blanket every mother keeps that is thicker than thrift approves, and sent him to the pallet by the stove as if he were a boy again, putting his toes against the warm tile to prove the world had not yet gone cold. He slept the sleep people only earn after telling the truth to exactly a right person. She sat in the chair and kept watch the way a lighthouse keeps watch, calmly, at intervals, willing to repeat herself across dangerous weather. I sat on the table, beside the cursed purse and the rescued cup, a small wrapped thing that contained nothing more ambitious than a good pair of gloves and a bit of luck. I tucked in a note that said, "Spend the luck on someone else. He would understand it eventually." In the morning, the street resumed its arguments. The city rarely transforms overnight. It consents to be better where instructed by stubborn kindness. The bakery's door complained when they opened it early. The baker looked at the boy, at the mother, at the hour, and weighed flour and mercy without announcing the calculation. He handed the boy a bag of potatoes and a knife and said nothing fancy, just peel. That is a sacrament of its own. I saw the demons of discouragement gather at the corners. Pride with its hands in its pockets, shame with its ledger, despair yawning and pretending to be unimpressed. I have dealt with them long enough to know they prefer an empty stomach and an idle hand. The boy ate, then worked. They faded, resentful. He lasted until noon. He lasted past noon. He made mistakes that annoyed men less busy with redemption and more protective of their countertops. He apologized without turning the apology into a speech. He learned the names of things without pretending to have known them yesterday. He did not steal, he did not run. When his mother returned with a parcel wrapped in brown paper and the face of a woman who has decided to be happy one errand at a time, he looked at her as if she were a door he had once believed locked and had just discovered opened outward. I kept crossing the city because there were other rooms, other kettles, other bargains that needed breaking and mending both. But I returned to them in my rounds, which is easy if you know the map of a place drawn by gratitude rather than by property lines. On the third day, the baker sent the boy with change to a customer known to count hard and accuse harder. The boy came back with dignity and the right coins and an expression that meant he had considered running and decided to finish one errand honestly before he rehearsed heroics. The baker grunted permission to breathe. On the fourth day, his mother made a stew that belonged to no recipe and every grandmother. The scent wrote its thesis all the way down the hall. The boy took off his hat at the door without being reminded. He set the good gloves on the mantel as if they were not yet his to own without supervision. He ate like a person, not a story about scarcity. He laughed once, startled by the sound, and looked at the floor as if he had broken something. His mother laughed too, lightly, to show him laughter was permitted to continue. By the end of the week, the boy had acquired the kind of tired that makes a bed a reward instead of an escape. He had also acquired an enemy worth having, the old version of himself that lives in mirrors and waits for a moment of weakness to volunteer for command. He would fight that one for years. He would lose to it now and then. But his mother had placed a better general in the house. Routine. Routine is the ally hope uses when it doesn't yet trust speeches. Christmas Day itself found them at a table that still looked like a table. Straight-backed, unpretentious, relieved to be useful. They had candles because light is medicine, not decor. They had neighbors because loneliness is a bad habit that cannot be broken in private. They had a loaf that remembered the boy's fingerprints from the bench. They had a silence between carols where two people who had nearly lost one another decided not to, every day, in smaller and smaller increments until the decision became easy. What became of him? He made some trouble and made more amends. He kept work and lost it, and kept it again, like a man learning to keep time with a band that is more patient than he deserves. He discovered he could carry packages without stealing from them, then discovered he could carry people's trust without trying to trade it for cash. He found himself telling a younger man that hunger turns jokes mean and that you should not let it. He surprised a policeman by describing the difference between a boy who has decided to be bad and a boy who is asking for permission to be good. He married late and carefully. He wrote his mother long letters that made her sit down for the luxury of reading them twice. You may be tempted to call this a miracle. If by miracle you mean a room, a kettle, bread divided sensibly, a mouth that refuses to use the sharp version of the truth when the plain version will do, a hand extended before it's strictly safe to extend it, and a young man who adds the word yet to every sentence that wants to end in failure, then yes, a miracle. They are not as rare as they pretend to be. They prefer addresses to headlines. They report to kitchens more often than to cathedrals. If, this season, you encounter a version of that boy, cold, foolish, practicing the grin that keeps help at bay, practice the mother's craft. Offer tea and quarrel later. Place a chair by the stove and ask nothing that would make shame grow clever. Point to work as if it were an ordinary blessing. Leave the purse on the mantel, not because you are naive, but because you are training someone to recognize the difference between money and memory. And if you are the boy, or a cousin of his, go home. Or if home requires years to rebuild, choose a room that acts like one and knock. I am in the business of mornings. That night, I tucked a small, plain envelope into a drawer that has learned to hold both rent and hope. Inside, I wrote a sentence that I write more often than people suspect. Begin here, not tomorrow, here. He found it on a day when routine had become hard again. He put it in his pocket and left it there, next to the good gloves, until the paper learned the shape of a man deciding to stay. Merry Christmas to the ones who return before they are ready and to the ones who hold the door without keeping score. May your kettles be prompt, your chairs generous, your arguments postponed until the tea is poured, and by then, unnecessary. May you fail at cruelty and succeed at the kind of honesty that makes mourning possible.